fairer, greener, healthier future for our communities. I'm Councillor Amy Foster. I'm a SERA member, welcome, and a member of Labour Walks and Cycles. My professional background is in education and the charity sector, where I've focused on how community-led change can help us build happier, healthier places to live. Very excited to be chairing the panel today alongside our partners Cycling UK and Living Streets. I just want to say thank you everyone for coming and joining us. So please do come in and make yourself welcome. I'd like to start by recognising that now is not an easy time for anyone working for change in the active travel space. We've been told by Rishi Sunak that we're a nation of drivers. His plan to back drivers seems to unpick many of the measures that communities have long been fighting for, and to put an end to dangerous and illegal driving that is ending and changing lives every day across the UK. We know that we need to do more across the country to improve sustainable and active travel options. But these things can only be delivered if we have things like 20-mile-per-hour limit zones or low traffic neighbourhoods. And with these measures under threat, it seems that positive change is less possible. And Rishi's rhetoric feels particularly painful given that last year alone, nearly 30,000 people were killed or seriously injured on Britain's streets. I personally wonder if it's because he gets around by helicopter that he seems to have so little awareness of what many of us experience on a day-to-day basis. Traffic jams, the near misses, the aggression, the noise and the fumes that show us that our road network is not working as it needs to. And I would like to acknowledge the moving video shared this week by Led by Donkeys. It was shared on behalf of the Bobby Cllr Trust, and it describes how Bobby's death on his way home from school in a road traffic fatality at the age of 6 has traumatised his family, and why safer speeds are needed. Video felt very close to home for our team. We walk our kids home from local state schools, and we know that children want to walk, scoot and bike. But that fear is the biggest barrier to more children being able to be more active in their everyday lives. And not just for children. Anyone who cannot dash or sprint or walk unaided is at a disadvantage on our streets. And Liverpool is sadly no exception to this. So I'd like to share a few points about our local context. So Peter Dowd, the MP for Bootle, lost his daughter. She was an NHS project manager and she was killed in 2020 cycling on her way to work. The Slow Down for Bobby campaign that I mentioned previously, founded in Bobby Cllr's memory, supports schools and communities to campaign for lower speeds for 20-mile-per-hour limits outside of their schools. As Joanne Cllr, Bobby's mum, says, Britain is not a nation of motorists. We are a nation of families. So, how we make our streets more welcoming, safer, and more inclusive is an issue that impacts every community in Britain. It's why we at Labour Walks and Cycles welcomed Steve Rotherham, the Liverpool Metro Mayor, when he launched a Vision Zero programme in 2022, targeting a reduction in road danger. We would also like to suggest that the last week has been an inflection point. As the Tories adopt conspiracy theories around road danger, it's becoming clearer to us that people in Britain aren't comfortable with needlessly dividing culture wars. They're interested in politicians with sensible answers to serious policy concerns. So this mission, this conference, and our mission for government is about hope and the courage to tackle complex and painful issues so that we can bring positive change to our communities. And our challenge today to our panelists is indeed how we can continue to empower communities to build on that vision for safer, healthier, and more sustainable streets. I'll be asking, what is your vision and how can we learn? So the session will be split into 3 parts: why, how, and what. I'll be inviting Duncan and Steve, our charity partners, to frame the why of Labour streets and active travel before we hear from Lee, Rezina, and Heidi on what, how they have delivered change for communities, what their vision is and their context, and how we can learn. and then we'll be opening to the floor to hear from you. And just a signpost as well that following the session, we would like to invite you to join us for a walk or cycle around Liverpool for those who can come and spare some time with us in the sunshine. So, to move on to the why, and say welcome to everyone coming in as we've been opening. Please find some space. So, as I said, Duncan and Steve will be leading us on the why, thinking about why we need travel policy in Britain that will help us tackle the climate emergency and create healthier communities, and why Labour needs a vision that brings people and our communities with us. So I will turn to Duncan first, correctly? Is that right? Yeah, so Duncan is Head of Campaigns and Advocacy at Cycling UK, the national cycling charity. Getting more people moving more actively and giving people real transport options, making cycling and walking natural choices for short journeys is a key part of Cycling UK's mission. Duncan leads the charity's work to persuade politicians and decision makers that investing in active travel has huge environmental, health, economic and social justice benefits. Duncan.
Thank you. So the why, well, to answer that question, we only really need to start by looking at some of the towns and cities, places and neighbourhoods that we have far too often across much of the UK. They are places and towns which are designed with one mode of transport in mind, which limit people's choices. So their choices end up being, for many, only to drive. It's why we now have twice as many children being ferried to and from school in a car than was the situation when I was going to school. And it's not that they don't want to walk or cycle to school. If you go to any year 6 primary school class and ask who cycles or walks to school, very few hands go up. If you then ask who would like to walk or cycle to school, almost every hand goes up. They're not doing it because their parents think the streets are too hostile and it's not safe for them to do so. And their parents' own travel behaviours have become ingrained because of the streets that we've designed for them. And that's the reality in relation to choice. We have a situation where, unlike many places in Europe, the streets don't feel places where cycling or walking would be the natural or obvious choices. And we then ask ourselves why we have some of the most obese children in Europe, why a third of year 6 pupils are classed as obese or overweight when they leave primary school. And then we ignore the fact that we only have 2% of them cycling to school, whereas it's massively more in most European countries. Now, I mention that because we need to look at the context when we're looking at the why, and we need to look at what the benefits of more people walking and cycling are, because that needs to be communicated to people to bring them on board. Because far too often it sounds like somebody's talking about walking and cycling as a good thing per se. And the story is what it means. I was listening to Dame SERA Story, Manchester's Active Travel Commissioner, early in the week, who told me that most of the metro mayors and their active travel commissioners see measures to get more people walking and cycling as a public health intervention. I'd go further and talk about many of the other economic and environmental benefits, but perhaps it's best summed up by Chris Boardman's words. Chris is now the Active Travel Commissioner for Active Travel England, and his comment is, name any crisis. More people walking and cycling helps. Now, somebody might be able to come up with one that it doesn't, but the reality is the point is still well made. It's an environmental benefit. It's a health benefit. It's good for the high street. It's good for the economy. Or as the Guardian journalist Peter Walker put it in the title of his book, active travel is a miracle pill. If I could say to any of you, I've got a pill. It can extend your life expectancy. It can reduce your risk of getting cancer by 45%. And I went on stating those facts. Most people would be saying, can I have one? And the pill is active travel. But we don't always do a good enough job of bringing people on board to explain those benefits or put the context together that in the UK, 1 in 6 people die from inactivity-related illnesses. And the cost of actually dealing with the impact of inactivity is 7.4 billion a year. So when a politician says we can't afford to actually build the cycle lane or create the urban realm space, one only needs to look at the actual costs of not doing it, which massively outweigh it. Now, unfortunately, it seems that the current government have overlooked some of that. They've also overlooked that actually active travel also reduces inequality. It's a tool for social justice because the benefits of transport choices, public transport choices and active travel, they benefit more those without access to the car. And 25% of households in the UK don't own a car. It's 50% of households who don't have access to a car in low-income families or those in socially rented accommodation. But the government's plan for the motorist is only for those who have access to a car, when what we needed was a plan for better and more transport choices. And that's being overlooked in relation to much of the debate currently. What's also crucially important for Labour, particularly in the context of the misleading thoughts people have about the Uxbridge effect, is that this stuff wins votes. Every single survey that is ever done shows that people support measures to make cycling and walking easier where they live, to make it safer. They support measures to introduce 20-mile-per-hour limits where they live. The last survey I looked at from YouGov was 77% of people in favour of these measures. But all too often, the noisy minority outweighs the opinion of the silent majority. But politicians do need to remember, and Labour needs to remember, that this stuff is popular and this stuff wins votes. Unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of a narrative at the moment that, or certainly the Conservatives seem to think, that anything that's green transport sounding is something that can be made a wedge issue in relation to forthcoming elections. That is a trap which Labour must not fall into. And it needs to be remembered that this stuff is popular and it also has massive benefits. And as mentioned earlier, it's also a tool for social justice. I'll end just by putting some of the context in relation to the latest plan for the motorist, which involves the Prime Minister suggesting that 15-minute cities were some conspiracy, and he was going to put an end to councils dictating to people where they could move and which shops they could go to, which no council has ever done. It's the transport equivalent of the 7 bins policy. So when we needed a plan that was socially just, we have a plan that favours own a vehicle and disregards those that do not. When we needed a plan that was looking at transport in the context of reducing carbon emissions, we've got a plan that looks effectively only at the biggest producer of carbon emissions in transport. And when we need a plan that's bold and ambitious for how we want to live and the places we want to live, and a transport system that's fit for the future, we have a plan that's looking to accommodate the failings of past decades of transport and urban rail planning. So it'll be great to hear from the rest of the speakers how they're going to fix it.
Thank you. And so just to say again to people coming in that we will hear from the panel before we go to questions, so to hold on to them, as I'm sure there's lots there that you'd like to know more about. So we're going to go to Steve next for our next part of our why. We are talking about Labour Streets and why Labour and government needs to be focusing on it. So Stephen Edwards joined Living Streets in December 2018, bringing a wealth of public affairs experience, having spent 18 years advising charities, companies and trade associations on their public relations and communication strategies. He has a wealth of education experience of chair of governors in a North London primary school, and you've been a trustee at a number of small charities.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to echo many of the points that Duncan made. I start from the premise that an incoming Labour government will face a number of crises and a number of challenges that need to be addressed. And walking and cycling are really the way in which we can address those challenges perfectly. We're going to have a health crisis, which we are already in the midst of, with children and adults not getting enough physical activity, an obesity crisis, and kind of many families at the risk of developing long-term health conditions, all of which can be addressed by people walking and cycling more. Study after study shows the benefits of designing places positively to encourage more walking. And for me, that's what 15-minute neighbourhoods are about. It's about planning places that people can walk around easily. It's not about some kind of international Marxist conspiracy. A Labour government will face a road safety crisis. Over the last 5 years, an average of 8 pedestrians and 108 pedestrians and 100 were killed on our roads, and 115 every year were seriously injured. And that's 115 families ripped apart by car dominance on our streets. And it's brave action, the kind of action that Lee is taking in Wales through introducing a default 20 miles per hour speed limit in our towns and cities, that can really address that and solve that crisis. We already have a massive air quality crisis, and there are signs that we can make a massive difference to that if we encourage people to walk their shorter journeys rather than drive. That is costing the NHS currently 20 billion plus a year. Complete waste of money, but also countless lives being destroyed by the impact of poor air pollution on our streets. Our high streets are collapsing after the last 15 years as well. And it's more walkable places that can make a difference to reinvigorating high streets. Our own research at Living Streets shows that more walkable streets can boost footfall by 30%, and that then has an accompanying impact on sales in retail as well. So more walkable places are better places for retail, they're better places for health, they're better places for air quality. But most importantly, the one challenge I haven't mentioned is climate change, and more walkable places, places where we can have less car journeys and more walking and more cycling, can address the existential crisis of climate change. Duncan spoke really powerfully about freedom. And in the work we do at Living Streets, day in, day out, what we are doing is creating that choice for people to walk their shorter journeys that all doesn't exist at the moment. This isn't an anti-car message, and I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is this is being used as a wedge issue. That's what the plan for drivers is all about. There is a positive message here about the benefits that walking can have in transforming people's lives. I look at some of the work we do at Living Streets to get more children walking to school, creating 17 million new walking journeys a year and removing 3 million car kilometres from the streets. That is a choice that children and parents have to walk journeys that they wouldn't otherwise have. We did some great work kind of a little bit up the road in Salford to help reduce the severance impacts of motorway that had stopped children from walking to school. And that is they're creating a positive choice that those children now have to walk to school that didn't otherwise exist. And work we did in Cardiff to work with older people on some of the barriers they face to walking, putting in place dropped curbs, ensuring crossings are in the right place, and reducing the impact of things like pavement parking and pavement clutter that was physically preventing people from leaving their homes. And that is, again, creating that positive choice that people then have as a result to walk shorter journeys. So it's about positive choice. It's about policy change and policy differences that can really transform people's lives. but it is also really, really good value for money as well. When I look at the kind of amounts we're talking about here, they are a drop in the ocean compared to the amounts we spend on our roads at the moment. I don't know whether to call it this government or the previous government, because we seem to be a bit mixed about our policy at the moment. But the government's this government's previous cycling and walking investment strategy actually did have some reasonably good targets for increasing walking and cycling. And the government had estimated in a study that hasn't still been published that it would cost around 4.5 billion to deliver on those targets. And when we compare that to the 24 billion that we spend on the national highway network, that's not all roads, because there's local authority roads. Just on the national highway network, it's a fraction for millions and millions of benefits that we're currently not getting. So this is something that really, really makes a difference. And there's low-hanging fruit in our journeys at the moment that can really, really be transformed into walking journeys. I think it's disgraceful that 40% of journeys in our urban areas are under 2 miles. Journeys that can be easily walked or cycled by most people, and 58% are under 5 miles, which could be easily cycled as well. So this is an agenda that can deliver real change within our communities and can make a positive difference for Labour as we move into the next election.
Thank you, Steve. So to move on to the what, so obviously to highlight that the remaining panellists are Labour politicians who have delivered concrete changes to people's streets, to their communities, as Labour in power across the country. So Lee is going to speak first for us. So Lee Waters, MS, is the member of the Senedd for Llanelli constituency and was born and raised in Carmarthenshire. His policy interests are wide-ranging, including the economy, climate change, provision for looked after children, digital policy and the media. Before being elected in May 2016, Lee was director of Wales's leading independent think tank, the Institute of Welsh Affairs. He previously ran the sustainable transport charity Sustrans Cllr, where he led the campaign for the Active Travel Act. Apologies for the pronunciation. He is a former chief political correspondent of ITV Wales and BBC Wales producer. So in 2018, he was appointed Deputy Minister for Economy and Transport, and you were appointed Deputy Minister for Climate Change in May 2021. So thank you.
Thanks, and you know what? I do have 6 bins, and it's fine. Well, thanks very much for the chance to come. I think it's really important that we share our experiences so we can learn from each other what's gone well and what's challenging. So I'll just rattle through what we're doing in Wales. So the first thing I think is important is to get the strategy right. So we have 10 years ago, this week in fact, passed the world's first Active Travel Act, a law which places a legal duty on all local authorities to make provision for walkers and cyclists, to plan a network of routes, to maintain it, to keep it up to date. And that is forcing all councils to have to do something, which I think is if that wasn't there, a number would do nothing. We've also got in our Wales transport strategy a target for modal shift. So this is the first time I think anyone has had a modal shift target at the centre of transport policy, and that's to move from our current 32% of journeys by sustainable means to 45% by 2040, which is not going to be easy. That's a real stretch target. 3 weeks ago, we changed the law to introduce a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in all built-up areas. So it's nice to be in a room where people applaud that. It doesn't always happen. But every road with streetlights that was 30 has fallen to 20 by default, with councils then having the ability to make exceptions to that, to say, well, that road makes more sense at 30. And we haven't got that right yet. That's going to settle down. But already the studies are showing that average speeds have dropped. And we know that will result in fewer casualties, fewer deaths. We estimate 6 to 10 lives every year saved in Wales, 2,000 casualties. and a saving to the NHS of 90 million a year, which is 3 times of the installation cost saved in the first year alone. But that's a big change. It's the biggest change to the rules on the road since seatbelts came in 1983, and it's going to take time to adjust. The other strategic things we did, we had a roads review earlier this year where we paused all road building schemes and judged our pipeline against our climate change targets and cancelled a large number of them. I'll come again. I quite like this guy. So we cancelled a large number of schemes. We have reviewed even more, and we have now a series of road building tests. So that, of course, we're going to keep building roads. The Tories are calling it a ban on road building. That's bollocks. We're going to build roads, but we're going to set the bar higher for when roads are the right solution to local problems. So we're not going to build roads that just increase road capacity. We're not going to build roads that just allow the traffic to speed up. So there's more information if you're interested in that on the Welsh Government website. And we are just about to launch a bill into the Senedd to re-regulate the buses, to have a proper... I'm really not used to this. To have a proper franchise system going beyond the Manchester model, but hats off to Andy Burnham for taking this to the courts and clearing the way to allow us to make this change. But we're going for a fully planned system of franchising where our plan is to have one network, one timetable, and one ticket. So that's the strategy. That obviously then, so that's the first key learning point, I think. The second then is the funding. So we have now this year the highest amount per head in the UK of funding on active travel. I think the cuts to active travel England's budget are myopic and miserable. We are facing very difficult times of austerity, and sustaining any funding is going to be challenging. But we are putting the money in, and that is beginning to show the results. So we're spending now, I think, £23 per head. So the challenge is you've got to sustain that over a generation. It's no good doing this in fits and starts. It has to be sustained. Skills and capacity, I think, is the next major theme I would highlight. And this is a real challenge for us. Local authorities, by and large, haven't got the bodies to do this. And the bodies they have don't really care very much about it. And even if they did care, they wouldn't know where to start. So we've, that's a bit of a generalization, but it's not far off. And I see Hewa Rankin-Davies there, my colleague, a former MP now, member of the Senedd, who's chairing the cross-party group in the Senedd on active travel. And we're really keen to keep this as a cross-party agenda because there's no need for this to become a partisan agenda, and also to encourage challenge. So I've asked Hugh repeatedly and regularly to challenge me as the minister, to tell us what we're getting wrong and to push us further. I think that's vital. We build that in. And he does, absolutely. So skills and capacity are a real challenge. I really like Active Travel England, and they've set up their Centre of Excellence, and they're making assessments of the maturity of local authorities and awarding funding on that basis. And we're going to do that as well. So that's something we've learned from England. The importance of behaviour change. Now, this is really hard because the funding for behaviour change comes from revenue. The obscure accountancy rules, but they really make a difference. It's easier to get money to build things than it is to run things in government, and finding money for adult cycle training and for walking buses and all the things we know the evidence tells us makes a real difference to using the infrastructure is hard to get, but that's critical. And then coming to an end, I think one of the key things is about making this normal. When I started cycling in Cardiff as an adult about 20 years ago, it was an eccentric thing to do. I felt quite odd. I'm a trouser in the sock cyclist. I'm not somebody who cycles for leisure. Or, I just get from A to B. But now it's become normal in Cardiff. So if you're in rush hour in Cardiff, there are just all sorts of people, all shapes and sizes, just getting around by bike. And the infrastructure the Cardiff Council have put in, segregated cycle lanes and taking away car parking spaces, has been very bold and brave and courageous, and it's making a difference, and we funded it. But in Llanelli, where I represent, it's where Cardiff was 20 years ago. I'm still eccentric in many ways in Llanelli, but by cycling on the roads, it's still quite an unusual thing. And then finally, I think just the importance of leadership. And back to what you were saying at the beginning, to have the courage to take the lead on this, because there are going to be pushbacks. There is going to be noises off, and you'll hear from them. You won't hear from the people who think it's sensible. We're certainly finding that on the 20 miles an hour. This is not a fringe agenda. This is a critical agenda for getting people around in a way that improves their health and our environment. And we've normalized for 70 years the car. We've created a car-dominated society, and cycling has been a fringe activity. And we've got to shift that. It's going to take a generation to shift. Copenhagen, Amsterdam didn't get there overnight. But it's down to the people in this room to create that movement for change, and for local authorities and for national governments to work together on those things I've just mentioned to really shift the gear. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, so much in there that I can see the notes being scribbled down furiously, and I'm sure we're going to have a wealth of questions when we get there. I am going to pass to Rezina. So Councillor Rezina Chowdhury is Deputy Leader of Lambeth Council and has responsibility for the Council's actions on the climate and ecological emergency. A fan of tactical urbanism, she oversees the delivery of Lambeth's ambitious transport strategy, advancing active travel in the borough by reshaping streets and neighbourhoods in favour of sustainable modes of travel. And she's launched Lambeth's pioneering and now award-winning curbside strategy, along with Lambeth's EV electric vehicle 2030 strategy and the Big Shift behaviour change programme. A mixed methods social researcher with over 20 years of policy development experience working in the private and public sector, she's led on many large-scale and high-profile research studies, most recently for the European Research Foundation on Low-Traffic Neighbourhoods and a rapid evidence assessment for the British Standards Institute on centering the use of standards in the global transition to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is this working? Okay, yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, especially since I get to talk about Lambeth and everything that we're doing. So apologies if I go on about it too much. But just to set some context, I'm not going to assume you all know where Lambeth is, but we're an inner London borough with around 330 residents. Where according to the 2021 census data, 40% of our households don't have access. No, only 40% of our households have access to a car, so 60% don't have access to a car. Yet our streets are dominated by cars, denying people with disabilities the ability to go around safely, to move around the area safely, denying children the opportunities to play, present considerable danger to hundreds of our residents, hundreds of people killed on our streets and seriously injured in collisions every year. So we believe that big structural changes are needed, and we're putting the building blocks in place for what we want to achieve. And the first step was simply putting people before cars as a political priority, and saying that we would not tolerate danger of unhealthy air for our residents. And after this, it was just a case of building our framework and our policies over time. So in January 2019, and I never sicken of saying this, is that we were the first London borough to declare a climate and ecological emergency, and we committed to ensuring the council's operations net zero by 2030. So in 2020, during the depths of the pandemic, we held a citizens' assembly. Normally, we'd want to do it in person, but we had to hold it online, and it was held quite successfully over 6 to 8 weeks. And we listened to our residents, and we heard very clearly what they said about wanting it to be easier to walk and cycle and wheel around Lambeth. They wanted to see greener spaces in their community. And during these discussions, they discussed a whole range of other things as well. We discussed food growing and recycling and retrofitting and active travel. And, they wanted more green spaces to socialize. They wanted safe spaces for their children to play, and they wanted more greenery. And so this all informed our climate action plan, which we launched in 2021. And this gave us permission. This gave us permission to go forward with our ambitious plans. And it's worth saying that over the last 8 years, Lambeth has led the way in improving our local streets and improving our air quality by cutting traffic and helping people to embrace cycling and walking and generally trying to green our neighbourhoods more. But we still have so much more to do. We want to do more, and we've got a lot further to go as well. So I just want to focus on about 5 sort of key areas that we're focusing on. And that's, so first of all, our road danger reduction strategy. And that sets out the role of reducing road danger as part of a wider shift towards healthier and sustainable neighbourhoods. And this means no fatal or serious collision on our roads in Lambeth is ever deemed inevitable or acceptable. And the strategy focuses on making our main roads safer and improving the links between neighbourhoods that are made safe by the low traffic neighbourhoods that we put in place. And talking of low traffic neighbourhoods, we've since 2020, we've put in 8 of these, and we've got more in the pipeline. And it's worth saying that LTNs are central to our vision for Lambeth because, they make our roads safer. All the roads that lead away from the main network immediately become safe and calm and just generally more pleasant for walking and cycling. I'm a very nervous cyclist, and I've started cycling a lot more since our low traffic neighbourhoods came in. So that's a result. Rolling out secure cycle parking. Lots of our residents live in flats. They don't have anywhere to park their bikes. How do we make it easier for people to shift to cycling? So making sure that we have secure cycling is really important. So we're installing 5,000 new spaces by 2026. And I recently decided to reduce the cost of cycle parking to £30 per bike per year using the family of 4 principle. And the family of 4 principle is essentially that a family of 4 shouldn't have to pay more to park their bikes than a family of 4 with a car. School streets are key. Our kids should be able to go to and from school safely without fear of being run over by a car or having to inhale its toxic fumes. So last month we announced the expansion of our school streets programme with 32 more school streets across the borough, which means that by 2026, by the end of 2026, we'll have 62 school streets covering 85% of the borough's primary schools. And finally, electric charging points. We're absolutely clear that electric vehicles are not the solution to the climate crisis because we all know the considerable carbon footprint they present and should only be used by people who need them. So we're building charging network for the number of cars necessary and not more. It's only for those who can't switch to sustainable modes. So we're not rolling them out everywhere. We just want to make sure we've got enough for people who need them. And we're doing this by daring to reclaim and reimagine our public realm. Back in January, we adopted the pioneering and now award-winning and internationally renowned curbside strategy. And I'm a broken record on this one, but we're really proud of it. And it sets out how we will use the curbside, which is the space between the pavement and the carriageway. And the curbside represents one of the largest public assets that we have control over. And in Lambeth, this curbside represents the equivalent of 194 football pitches, or if you line them all up from end to end, it would reach from London to Edinburgh. So today, 94% of the curbside is used to provide and manage car parking. And when you think that 60% of our households don't own a car, that's a bit unfair. So going forwards, we're going to reallocate this space. We're going to reallocate it for trees and cycle parking and parklets and EV charge points. And as well as changing the use of the space, we're going to bring in consistent curbside pricing policy. I mean, there are currently 40 different uses of curbside uses and and pricing. So we want to bring it all together and make sure that it's aligned for to climate and air quality, and making sure that we create the right incentives and nudge to shift to healthier streets. So Amy, you asked me for 3 takeaways, and I'm going to list my 3 takeaways for everybody. So the first one is be ambitious and hold your nerve. It is possible to make bold changes despite a vocal minority opposing active travel measures. There are extremes on either side. You've got, for one side, you can't, you're not going fast enough, and for the other side, you're going too fast. But fortunately, there's loads of people in the middle, and for most people who occupy the middle, once they experience active travel, low traffic neighbourhoods, school streets, you name it, they love it, and they feel and see the benefits, and they become advocates. Secondly, make friends with people who will push you more. I've benefited from really close relations with Mums for Lungs, Living Streets, Cleaner Cities Campaign, Possible, and many others, and who've given me so much support. And especially during some really torrid times, people can be quite nasty out there, and it's really good to have that support. And building and maintaining these relationships will support you to go further. And finally, for me and for everybody here, I hope it's about climate justice. I managed to annoy some people when I talk about the global south and the fact that they have been living with the realities of climate change for decades. In Bangladesh, where I'm from, people are already living with temperature rise of 1.1 degrees. So I see reducing emissions as a moral obligation. Closer to home in Lambeth, there are similar injustices where the least climate resilient parts of the borough are the most deprived neighbourhoods with the dirtiest air. So I've always had this sense of justice in the back of my mind when making these really difficult decisions in Lambeth. And we need to do more, and we will do more. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rezina. It's always really exciting to hear a politician use the word daring when they're talking about their work, and really inspiring to hear your targets. So last but not least on the panel, Heidi Alexander, Labour's parliamentary candidate in South Swindon and a member of the Transport for London board. She was the Labour Member of Parliament for Lewisham East until 2018. When she was elected in 2010, she served in the Whip's office before being appointed as Shadow Secretary of State for Health. And between 2006 and 2010, Heidi worked as Deputy Mayor of the London Borough of Lewisham and Cabinet Member for Regeneration. She's also a graduate of Durham University, where she received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Geography and a Master's in European Urban and Regional Change. June 2018 to 22, she was Deputy Mayor for Transport and Deputy Chair of Transport for London. And during her time at City Hall, she focused on delivering the Mayor's transport strategy, ensuring London has a reliable, comfortable and affordable public transport system which is accessible, creating safe, healthy streets where people want to walk and cycle, and ensuring that new homes and new jobs are part of a sustainable, integrated transport system which delivers good growth across the capital. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And there's a lesson there, isn't there, about editing your bio before you send it over, because it's slightly embarrassing to sit here listening to sort of your life played out. Really, really delighted to be here with you and see so many friends and former colleagues in the room as well, and lots of smiling faces. And I just wanted to say to Lee that actually I think I probably am still seen as a bit of an eccentric when I'm on my bike in Swindon, not least because it's got a massive plastic crate on the front that I insist upon putting boxes of leaflets and my shopping all in, and I struggle up a hill called Victoria Hill, and the good people of Swindon cheer me on. They encourage me up there. They say, "Go on, love, you can do it." And so I take that as a political endorsement as much about my fitness levels. So yeah, I'm the Labour Party's parliamentary candidate in South Swindon. I was selected to be the candidate last summer. It's my hometown. I was the Member of Parliament for 8 years between 2010 and 2018 in Lewisham East. And as Amy said, I was Deputy Mayor for Transport in London for 3.5 years and had the privilege of working with Sadiq Khan. I don't think the two areas could be more different, if I'm being honest. When I lived in Lewisham, I was 5 minutes walk away from the DLR station and the mainline rail station. I think there were 8 mainline rail stations in the very densely populated constituency that I represented. You have more buses than you could shake a stick at, very low levels relatively of car ownership. And I've moved back to Swindon, where I grew up, and see a town that was planned in the 80s and 90s predominantly, huge expansion around a Victorian core, and that town has been planned for the car. So we have kilometres of roads that don't have pavements. In some parts of Swindon, you're lucky if you see 1 bus an hour. And so I hesitate to use this description, but I think it is fair to say that at the moment, the car is king in Swindon. And I paint that picture just because I think when we're talking about what our vision is for Labour streets, for healthy streets, for clean streets, for safe streets, we have to make sure that our vision is as applicable in Lewisham or Hackney or Lambeth as it is to places like Swindon and Telford and Tamworth and Peterborough. And people's experiences and the way they live their life at the moment are genuinely very different. But I don't think I will ever forget working in Transport for London and working alongside Will Norman, who was the Mayor's Walking and Cycling Commissioner, who is one of the most inspiring people I ever worked with. And he used to tell me stories, as Duncan talked about when he went into the primary schools and asked children to paint pictures of how they would like to get to school. And they don't paint pictures of traffic jams and people sat in cars feeling angry and frustrated. They draw a picture of children holding hands, walking down streets with trees on, some flowers, the odd space rocket launcher thrown in as well, which I'm not suggesting should be part of our transport policy in the future. But I think when we're thinking about the communities and places that we would like to build, we should keep that image in mind. And on the days that I'm feeling that we're being battered a bit by the media, I try and remember the quote from a guy called Enrique Peñalosa, who was the mayor of Bogota, who basically said, children are like an indicator species in urban areas. If you make a town or city successful for children, it will be good for everyone. And I think that is what everyone on this panel is actually trying to achieve. So the work I did with Sadiq in London, we had a brilliant mayor's transport strategy, 3 planks to it. One was about creating that affordable, accessible, comfortable public transport system. The other one about healthy streets. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We had a healthy street set of indicators, 10 things about the things that you need to make a street healthy. So, can you cross the road easily? Have you got somewhere to sit down? Is there shade when it's a sunny day? Are there things that are going to make the street interesting? This was put together by a woman called Lucy Saunders, who used to work at Transport for London. And when local communities are thinking about this, I think that's a great framework for thinking about the things that we need to do in order to create better streets for everyone. So we had that at the heart of the Mayor's transport strategy. We pushed through a major expansion of segregated cycling infrastructure. We tackled some of those really dangerous junctions. I listened to stories of women who had been very, very seriously injured, lost limbs on the Old Street roundabout, and the same collision was happening in the same place. They were ending up in the same hospital ward, different people year after year. And so when you hear those stories, you have to do something about it. We put in new routes for cyclists as well. I did a lot of work on delivering the Elizabeth line, the fantastic new train line. But I said at my TfL leaving do that the thing that I was actually proudest of was delivering Cycleway 4, which runs from Lewisham up into London Bridge. And when people ask me, what do I miss about living in London? I say Cycleway 4. It is lost on some people, to be honest. We also introduced 20-mile-per-hour zones on the Transport for London road network in central London. We've had some research done at TfL on that and have seen that collisions have reduced by 25%. The number of people killed and seriously injured has gone down by 25%, and a 36% reduction in the number of vulnerable road users who are involved in those collisions as well. We put the ultra low emission zone in, first in central, then in inner in 2019 and 2021. That went a bit smoother than the 2023 expansion, which we're all aware of. We had Vision Zero at our heart, which is about making sure that nothing in terms of collisions on our roads is either inevitable or acceptable. And I think some of the other speakers have talked about that. We did introduce those safe speeds, street redesign. We also introduced something called the direct vision standard, which meant that any big vehicles coming into London have to comply with a very strict set of rules to ensure that there is visibility from, you know, these huge cement mixers that are actually driving around very, very busy urban streets, big lorries, big trucks. And that's having a knock-on effect because these vehicles don't just drive in London. They're coming from outside of London into the capital. We also wanted to address those dangerous behaviours as well. And, you know, I do think that we're going to have to work in collaboration with everyone that uses the roads in order to do this. I was talking to a driving instructor recently who told me a fantastic story about the fact that what they used to say, they'd point at a cyclist when they were teaching learners and they'd say, "What's that?" And the learner would say, "It's a cyclist." And they'd turn around and say, "No, it's your responsibility." And actually, every time you see a cyclist, you think that's my responsibility. So I think it's incredible that we've got to a position where wanting people to drive responsibly is now a point of political controversy. I mean, how is that the case? Personally, you know, I think we've got a Tory party that is not serious about government. They're flirting with the likes of Nigel Farage and these conspiracy theories on the internet. And that is what is driving this whole narrative that we are seeing at the moment. The warning signs were there, I think, a couple of years ago when we were trying to do stuff in London. You should have seen the flack that I got because I wanted to work with the boroughs who wanted to take cars out of key junctions like Bank Junction, outside the Bank of England, Tottenham Court Road. I had the audacity during COVID to put a bike lane in on Park Lane and had a picture taken cycling down Park Lane with the arm in the air on my bike, and that sent the black cab drivers absolutely mad. The only thing I would say before I just finish these remarks is that I don't think we should underestimate the extent to which some of the urban myths have actually already taken hold. So on the doorsteps in Swindon, I am asked questions about 15-minute cities. When I said to my dad recently, who is a man in his 70s, who will cycle everywhere if he can, when I said to him, you do know that if you're hit by a car at 30 miles per hour as opposed to 20, you're 5 times more likely to die. And he said, be really interested to know where you got those statistics from. And if my dad, who cycles everywhere, has picked this up, you know, and he wants to see safer, better streets, I think that probably does just underline the extent of the challenge that we're facing. My 3 quick takeaways, I only had 2, so I'm going to definitely nick one of Rezia's, which was make friends with people that will push you harder. My 2 are slightly in contrast to yours, probably, Rezia, which is work with communities and don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Yeah. Some of the time, compromise is the right thing to do. Yeah, bravery is a fine attribute in politics, but don't be afraid of compromise if that enables you over the longer term to make progress. And I think we've got a responsibility as an incoming Labour government to get the basics right, because none of this will work if we don't have a functioning, accessible, affordable public transport system. You can't say to people, let's reduce car dependency, if we don't also give them a means to get about and live their lives. We've got to sort the planning system out as well. We can't continue to build homes that aren't on proper public transport networks, because you get isolated communities and you build in that car dependency from the start. So I'll leave it there because I know you want to move to questions, but thanks very much for listening.
So I'm going to ask one question as the chair and take that prerogative. And I just wanted to draw out the strands around inclusion and equity that have come through, I think, in each of our speakers. We've heard around accessible and inclusive streets for different kinds of ability, but also things around local authorities, their skills or their desire for change. We've heard around the different budgets across the country and different kinds of forms of government coming, and also that safety itself can be subjective for many people. And so I would wonder, perhaps Heidi, drawing on your different experiences, or Rezina, or other members of the panel, what else could you draw out around like this policy framework as making it sure it's equitable? And then when we're talking about these things, we don't overlook the fact that how our streets are designed is a question of equity and inclusion, as well as transport. Do you want to start?
Yeah, you go
Yeah,
first.
okay. So in terms of equity and inclusion, obviously it has to start with our residents. And I'm talking from a very Lambeth specific point. You know, our residents are very engaged, and they tell us when they don't like things and they want things to change. On the other hand, there are also lots of other people who we hardly hear from. And these are people who are busy getting on with their lives, finding it really difficult to manage with the cost of living crisis. Generally, they have other things that they need to worry about. So how do we engage them? And we need to hear those voices, because unfortunately, and we found out, you know, when we were rolling out our low traffic neighborhoods, was that it was a lot of the same voices, very loud, saying the same thing over and over again. And we weren't hearing from the residents that we wanted our policies to impact positively. So just to give you an example, and it always makes me laugh how during the consultation for low traffic neighborhoods, this was one of our favorites, people on various WhatsApp groups and Nextdoor and Facebook and whatever, they say, oh yes, but think about the Black and ethnic minority communities that are going to be disadvantaged by these low traffic neighborhoods. This is a really racist thing. And I'd wonder, because I think, well, hang on, why have you never been bothered about the rights of Black and ethnic minorities prior to low traffic neighborhoods? So, which rather kind of, sort of diminishes their argument. So, yes, so that was a bit of a divergent, but to go back to people and to make sure that you hear all the voices and not just a few loud ones.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, you know, even if you just look down through the lens of gender and our experience of how we move around, women are often doing a lot more trips that are individually linked together. I think it's got a term, I can't remember the name of it, as opposed to perhaps making a specific journey. And we've got to find a way of ensuring that you've got the range of voices that are feeding into this process. I also think we need to think about the message that we're conveying, because reducing car dependency is not about banning car journeys. And for some people, a car is the right mode of transport for that trip that needs to be done. And so, yeah, I don't want to generalize, because I know that, you know, if you go to countries like the Netherlands, the older that women get, the more likely they are to cycle. But if you've got older people, disabled people that are needing to make journeys in the car, if we can reduce unnecessary car trips, their experience on the road is actually going to be better, because there's going to be less congestion. There's going to be there are going to be fewer traffic jams. And so I think we do need to think about how we sell the convenience message for other people, as well as the people whose journeys we're actually trying to change. So that would be my reflection.
I think Lee wants to add.
Yeah, so just to build on that, we've got to make the right thing to do, the easiest thing to do, because people will do the easiest thing. And we spent 70 years making the car the easiest way to get around, and everything else slightly cumbersome. And that's what we got to change, because it's not about asking people to be green heroes or to put themselves out. We've got to re-engineer the system. So it's just the common sense way to move around. And that's the key. We shouldn't have to evangelize the people. It's just make it easy. So I think that's a really important point in terms of all of our design work and our thinking, is take the friction out. So for example, 20 years ago, Wales had some of the worst recycling rates in Europe. We're now 3rd best in the world. And that's because, there we go again. and that's because we've made it easy. And making it easy, we've changed people's habits. So now you automatically start to think, how do I get this bit of recycling? I found myself before now at 6 in the morning chasing down some stray bit of cardboard that had blown away in my pants because I was so hooked into the behavior change of I got to recycle that bit. But that's habitual and it comes over time. I'm just on the equity point. Active travel is a social justice agenda. We talk about fuel poverty, where it's widely understood you spend more than 10% of your income on heating your home, you're in fuel poverty. And yet transport poverty is ignored. And we know, as it was mentioned, that the poorest, I think you mentioned it, the poorest 20% of the population spend over a quarter of their household income on running a car because we've taken away their choice. And this is my point, Heidi, on the libertarian argument, is that we want choice. At the moment, you don't have choice. Most people, if they haven't got a car, have real inconvenience and frustration to get around. So we've taken away their choice. We're forcing them to have a car. And we want to give people choice. So it's a more diagnostic choice. We're not telling them how they should get around, but we make it easy to do a thing that actually brings multiple benefits.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to, and there are brilliant answers there. And I think there are so many hands up very quickly already. And Catherine has the mic. So we will take 3 questions at a time, and if you would like to suggest who might want to respond, obviously we haven't heard from Steve or Duncan again, or the panel can come through. I think with the laptop in the front row, this lady here with the glasses had her hand up very quickly, and then if you.
Super, thanks so much. My name's Laura Fatta. I'm from Global Action Plan. I thought it was really interesting to hear all the reference to cleaner air, better health, and that kind of public benefit, giving people more. I wonder what panelists would think about something we're calling for, which is a public health engagement campaign on air quality and how it harms health. And if people understood that it was harming their health, they would then be more supportive of these kind of initiatives and projects going forward.
Thank you.
So yeah, would you support that?
And then shall we go to the gentleman just behind with black glasses, and then the lady at the end of the checked. Sorry, black. Yeah, after.
Thank you. I'm a councillor in Birmingham in the ward where we trialled LTNs. And even though I was elected on a mandate to deliver them, and we have done, we're still facing a lot of kind of abuse and conspiracy theories from a very vocal minority. And our success really informs whether and how we roll that out across the rest of the city, which was built by and for cars. So I wonder what advice any of you would have on dealing with that kind of aggressive conspiracy theory led tactics to stall or stop progress. Thank you.
Did you say here? So the lady just there with the glasses. Oh no, they're just behind. Sorry, I'm very sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name's Jenny Yates and I'm the Cabinet Member for Transport in Wandsworth. And thank you for all the inspiring speeches, which will inspire me to be braver and carry on in Wandsworth. And what I wanted to ask was perhaps Heidi and Rezina, an argument I often encounter about low traffic neighbourhoods is that then pushing traffic onto the main roads, which are obviously designed for more traffic, will disadvantage the residents on main roads who often tend to be poorer people, for example, living in flats above shops, so that they will then suffer the consequences of more air pollution. So it's actually unjust for them. And I wondered what measures you think can be effective to address that argument so that they aren't disadvantaged, or what you think about that argument. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps if I suggest that the question around air quality and engagement campaigns could be answered by Duncan and Steve as your roles of sort of policy work, and then our politicians can come around the myths and building support. Is that okay? Do you want to go first, Duncan?
So yes, the global action plan idea of public health in relation to air quality. Yes, I think that's fantastic. I'd go a little bit further, obviously, because we're looking at this not just through the prism of air quality. I think there's a huge amount of public health information that people just aren't actually working out. The sums in relation to some of this. We spend 3% of our National Health Service budget on preventing people from getting ill, and 97% on fixing them when they are. In any sane world, that doesn't make any sense at all. But those arguments aren't being presented in terms of what we need to do as a society to prevent things from happening, and the actual prevention benefits of actually ensuring that our air is cleaner, ensuring that people are more active. So people seem to have shied away from that fear that they might sound like the nanny state. But it's strange because we didn't do that over smoking. We didn't do that over a number of other health-related issues. We were bolder in terms of communicating what needed to be done. And people sometimes took a little bit longer to accept the position, but the message eventually landed. So yes, very supportive of that.
So we're also very supportive of it. There's a lot of work we've done with Global Action Plan in the past. And I think one thing we found that's very powerful is working out what the impact of poor air quality is on certain communities, and then getting those communities and the people affected by it on a day-to-day basis to advocate for change. And it's children that are bearing the brunt of many of these problems, and it's children that can be powerful advocates for change. I come in on the point Birmingham colleague made about trolls. I think looking at the quality of the debate around changes to our streets, the kind of things that are kind of quite straightforward, and the nastiness of some of these debates is disgraceful. I look at some of the things that Lee's had to put up with over the last few months, and it's absolutely appalling. And it's how we hold strong in that environment is very, very difficult. When I think about that wider point around public consultation, though, I always think of it in terms of kind of 4 key principles. I suppose, first of all, everyone in the community has something to offer, and you need to be really clear about why change is needed, and transparent about why that change is needed. And you're not always going to be able to convince everyone, but there is that bunch of people that won't be loud, won't be vocal, that really understand the need for change. And those are the people that you need to ensure being heard through in this debate. And they're not going to be traffic engineers, they're not going to be transport planners, but taking the message out to them and think about how you can get them active in the discussion is going to be hard. I think it's worthwhile spending time on doing that properly.
Yeah, just very quickly, just on the air quality point. So we're just taking an air quality law through the Welsh Parliament, and Hugh Rankin Davis, my colleague over there, is smiling at me because we're currently negotiating over an amendment to place a legal duty on all public bodies in Wales to promote the air quality benefits of active travel. So Hugh and I are coming to agreement on that, and that'll be part of the Welsh law when it goes through. So that's to answer that. Just on the broader point of the people that are opposed, I don't want to be flippant about this, but I just want to put this in the the historical context of the arc of progress. There were people opposed to the law who wanted to stop children going up chimneys. Yeah. There were people opposed to giving women the vote. There were people opposed to introducing seat belts. There were people opposed to banning smoking in public places. This is an evidence-based policy. Most people support it, and we should have the nerve to push it through.
Personally, as well, I like the point around the sort of myth busting and the LTNs. I think Rezina and Heidi, I know that often the backlash can be very personalised, racialised, or using gender against people. So I don't know if Heidi and then Rezina want to come through on the.
Yeah. So Jenny, in answer to your question, and I don't know whether you've ever looked at some of the work that an academic called Rachel Aldred has done about the displacement effect of low traffic neighbourhoods onto the boundary roads. And she has done some studies which actually do show that whilst in the in the short term, as people start to adjust their habits, there may be some impact. Over the longer term, as people start to change the trips that they're doing and the ways that they do it, over the longer term, you will, there isn't, that overall there's a reduction of traffic in the area. And so I think that if you just Googled her name, some of her work is the best work that I've seen on the subject. It is a really difficult issue, and I could name road after road after road in London, 2 years after leaving the City Hall job, where I know that there is a massive issue. There's a big issue in Lewisham about it. And so I think all you can do is be reasonable, present what the research actually shows, listen to people, engage with people. But as Stephen has said as well, we're not going to convince everyone. We're not going to be able to win everyone over. And this is the truth of some of these things. But I hear you. I know Louise, who's here from Lewisham, has had some direct experience of this. So whether it's Jenny or the colleague from Birmingham, Louise in Lewisham might be a person to speak to as well.
And then just Rezina before I can see.
Yeah, so I echo what Heidi said about Rachel Aldred. I mean, that research, we use that research, and actually behaviour change takes time. Mm-hmm. You know, this stuff doesn't happen over 3 months, over 6 months, over a year even. It can take decades sometimes. And, you know, Lee made the point about the fact that 70 years of car manufacturing, car driving, you know, people have got used to like buying cars cheaply and it's convenient. And we are now trying to rewire something that's embedded so hard in our psyche. So it will take time. Yes, there'll be people grumbling because, you know, we are taking something away, and loss aversion is obviously going to make everyone like throw their toys out the pram. But, you know, we also, as politicians and activists here, we need to be consistent in our message about why it's important that we do this. We're not doing this because we're being, you know, awkward and we just want to make their lives difficult. We also want to help and sell the greater benefits and give them a vision of what the future will look like and how they will have healthier children, how the NHS bill will go down because people will be healthier. So it's a longer term. And unfortunately, I've worked in behaviour change in government, and, you know, and I was fed up of like, you know, getting messages from people saying, well, has this campaign worked then? We don't know. It's only been out 3 months. Yeah. So yeah, basically we need to be a bit more patient.
Thank you. So we will take 3 more questions and we'll have like quick answers as time is speeding past. Please come in. You're very welcome. Please, the seat. Catherine, I think the lady with the glasses on the top of her head, gentleman there, and Jill.
Hi, I'm Sarah Roberts. I'm from Hope Valley Climate Action. And I just wanted to say the experience of living in London and then moving to a rural area builds on Heidi's experience. But there is generations of evidence that kids still want to cycle to school safely, even in a place where there's, you know, lots of cars. The big barriers are investment in infrastructure and councils not having the capability or the drive or the capacity to do it. So my question is, how do we shift that? And I love the figure of £23 per head on active travel. What do we need? What would Labour do? How much would we be spending on active travel per head, particularly in rural areas who have almost nothing at the moment?
Hello, I'm Zara Cunliffe from Wellingborough CLP. I want to go even further, or would like you to go even further with the air quality when you're winning hearts and minds. If you're thinking not just about roads, but my school, secondary school, 1,500 people used to go there. There's 1,500 cars twice a day dumping pollution in the place of the car park of the place of learning where your kids are. If that isn't going to sell the hearts and minds arguments to parents, twice a day, all that pollution is being dumped in and around their school, then what is? So educate the parents, please.
Thanks. And the final. I think there's that is gentleman there. Jill.
I think what I'm going to say relates to what the other two ladies have just said. We're looking forward to Labour in government, but meanwhile in Wales and in Lambeth, we've already seen the difference Labour governing can actually make. How can we get the level of expertise to the people who are in power in Labour already, the local councillors, you know, the real basics, the planning, when they, you know, put in cycle parking when houses are built, things like that. Then communities that will be voting can actually already see the difference it can make. And on a really positive note, because I live in Stevenage and we have infrastructure, 80% of our year sevens at my school cycle or walk to school.
So we perhaps Heidi would like to take the one around Labour in government and spend.
So I'm sure all of you in the room know that one of the big things that we've been talking about in the run-up to the next general election is our Green Prosperity Plan, spending £28 billion by the second half of the next Parliament. What we haven't done so far is set out exactly how we would use all of that money. Now, for me, investment in public transport and active travel is absolutely critical to tackling climate change. Transport accounts for 26% of carbon emissions in the UK. And so, you know, I think conversations with Ed Miliband and his team about how that £28 billion of Green Prosperity Plan money is going to be used is going to be absolutely critical to ensure that the money is there to do the infrastructure changes, to provide the cycle parking, to run the behaviour change campaigns that are needed. But I think that there's a credible argument that could be mounted for some of that money.
Thank you. And then I think, Lee, Lee, you want to talk about rural. I think also your experience is perhaps linked to the point around the schools where people are having to commute for work by car perhaps, and the rapid pace of change and building up the skills within your authorities to deliver the work that's needed.
Okay, I was going to be brief, but you're adding to my list here. But just to add to Heidi's point, you know, active travel investment per pound, the best value for money of any transport investment by a country mile. And there's buckets of solid evidence to show that. So I think we need to make the economic case for active travel investment rather than nice to have middle class preoccupation. This is just bloody good economics. Just on rural, as I think it's a neglected area of discussion, I think. We're doing some work on it now because one of the political pushbacks you get is this is a rural country, this is an urban agenda, this doesn't mean anything to us. And that's just not right. You know, if you look at rural Sweden or rural Switzerland or rural Germany, you know, they have much better public transport than we have in many of our towns and cities. You know, they have some of those areas have a bus every hour to every village, funded by a local business tax. I think in the German example. So we're looking at the wrong frame of reference. You know, there are plenty of deep rural areas around Europe that have a much better public transport system. It's about political choice. There's nothing inevitable about it, but we do need a different strategy in rural than we do in urban. We've been doing some work on this. So, you know, for example, most people live in towns, even in rural areas, or within 10 kilometers of a town. So creating some radial networks of cycle paths for electric bikes, and I think in rural EVs are a game changer, is doable and practical and could really make active travel a viable option for people in rural areas. But don't let the highway engineers lead it because they'll just put them next to the roads. We've got to build attractive routes. And now this is the challenge, that's a really fiddly, complicated thing to do because there's multiple land ownership, it takes time. And of course, they don't want to do that. They're used to building a road where they can just get a CPO blast through and all the powers are in one place and they get their motorway pawn on the wall. They love that. A rural path is much more complicated and a lot of grief. So back to the skills piece, you know, we do need, I think Active Travel England is making a really good start. We need to start building up regional hubs of experts to share practice, to peer review and to help. And that, I'm afraid, it does involve some level of national coordination.
Thank you. So,
Amy, can I just come in on a couple of those points as well?
Oh, I was going to say time to wrap up, Steve. Maybe in your final thoughts, perhaps you could use that time.
I just wanted to really come in quickly on the technical point. I think that for too long, officers have been used to just getting the maximum number of cars through junctions rather than thinking about how we get the maximum number of people through junctions and through streets. And this is about, it's about both a technical skill set and thinking differently about our streets, but it's also about a new mindset and new ways of thinking about how we do things differently and how we do things creatively. And I suppose a final comment to sum it all up. This is about thinking about that mindset, but it's also about thinking about how we plan our towns and cities and how we create better places in the future. Because for too long, we've thought about how we design streets around cars. This is about how we design streets around walking, cycling, integrating public transport into that. So we really design places that are fit for people rather than fit for cars.
I'd agree with all of that, and unusually for a politician, you've heard quite a lot from me in this session. So what I'm simply going to do in my minute remaining is say thank you ever so much to SERA, Labour Walks and Cycles, for all of the work that you do to keep this issue top of the agenda. And I hope very much that next year, when we meet again, we'll be meeting with a Labour government that's investing in this.
Thank you. Rezina, would you like?